Conflict is always going to be a feature of the work environment, and in fact it can be healthy. It's healthy to have a diverse team with different ideas, bringing different things to the table. With creativity is always going to come conflict. But when conflict goes over that line, it's no longer healthy. You need to manage it and you need to prevent it. And in this video, I'm going to tell you exactly how. Hello, my name's Jenefer. I'm the founder of Silk Helix, and we specialise in training in business owners and leaders in all things HR and people management, as well as consultancy for small companies with HR and employment law advice. So in this video, I'm going to explain to you exactly how we can prevent conflict in the workplace and how we deal with it when it comes. The first question in dealing with conflict is understanding what causes it. According to the CIPD, the most common cause of conflict is personality clash and lack of respect. I'd argue that that's most commonly what I hear from business owners. I get a phone call that says, we've got a personality clash, these two just cannot get on. What do we really mean though by a personality clash? And sometimes personality clash is used to explain actually bullying or toxic behaviours. So I think firstly we need to understand what it is we really mean. We will get personality clashes. So when we've got polar extremes, let's say an introvert working with an extrovert, there's going to be real clashes in their needs and their attitudes. The same as people who have different values, different morals, a different upbringing. Our upbringing impacts how we behave as adults, therefore how we behave in the workplace. There's no getting away from that. It's going to have an impact, and when we've got those differences, it brings diversity, but it also brings challenges and conflicts and potentially personality clashes. Personality clashes can also come from just different ideas on what the solution should be, and of course not feeling heard, a really core part there. In fact, all of those that I've described, when people don't feel heard, it has a huge impact on their feeling of being respected, their feeling of being valued. We can have different values, we can have different morals, we can have different upbringings, we can have different ideas on the solutions, but when we don't listen or we don't feel heard in speaking our truth, our experiences, our ideas, that's often where the conflict really comes. So personality clashes are often down to that. Yes, we have disagreements. Yes, we have different ideas on things, but actually it's that next step in terms of, are we able to communicate those? Are we able to treat each other with respect in communicating those differences? Do we feel heard? And that's often, in my experience, where those personality clashes actually become conflict in the workplace. Other causes of conflict, also often described as a personality clash but go beyond that, are bullying behaviours, controlling behaviours, toxic behaviours. All of these things are problematic. It takes two people to have a respectful conversation. They both have to be in that conversation with a view to listening to the other person, with a view to being respectful. It only takes one person to break that conversation down and ensure that somebody either doesn't feel listened to or feels bullied. That only takes one person. It doesn't take two to tango, as the saying goes. It only takes two to make a healthy conversation. So we do need to explore whether it is a genuine personality clash where we could sit people down, get people listening to each other, or whether these behaviours are somebody who just refuses to hear from another point of view, wants to be very dictating, very controlling in the way that they behave, is very toxic in their viewpoints, very much I'm right, you're wrong. Those behaviours need to be clamped down and dealt with in, say, a disciplinary procedure. I've got other videos on toxic behaviours and the disciplinary procedure that I really do recommend that you have a look at. I've also got a course on the disciplinary procedures, and I do recommend that you take a look at that course because it goes into all the details of exactly how you would deal with toxic behaviours through the disciplinary procedures. Another common source of conflict is change. This could be change in environments. Often it's change that's necessary for the business. Often you've got somebody in the business who actually isn't going to change with you. It's their time to move on. Moving on from a company, from employment, it's not disloyalty. It's not aimed at you personally as a director of the business or as a manager. Sometimes the time has come where somebody needs to move on and they're no longer right for your business. That can come out in behaviours that we have to deal with through the disciplinary procedure or through performance management. Most commonly though, people will find their own way, their own path to another role that better suits what they're looking for and their values and at the time. That's not a bad thing. In fact, it can be really healthy to have that kind of turnover. The difficulty we have with employment law, of course, is that we can't push people to that without having risks of kind of constructive dismissal and unfair dismissal and things like that. So we have to be really cautious about that. But sometimes we do have to stand our ground and say, this change is happening and we need people to come along. And these are the business reasons why we need that change. And a really big source of conflict I come across, especially in small businesses, is not having boundaries, not having clear boundaries, not being clear with people about what's expected of them, not having job roles defined, not having goods defined. So people don't really know what's expected. They don't really know what the rules are. And what happens is we get the manager or the owner who suddenly every now and again kind of flares up with this frustration at all the things they're taking on because they haven't tackled things as they've gone along. They haven't reinforced the behaviours they want. They've allowed things to fester. They've allowed things to continue. And then all of a sudden it all blows up and it's clear people aren't happy, people are frustrated. And often even then it doesn't really get resolved. It doesn't really get moved on. So lacking clear expectations and clear boundaries can also cause conflict. And this one is really easy to solve in that you as the manager or the owner of the business have the control to be able to set those expectations, set those boundaries. It can be challenging because it suddenly to people this will be new and not something they've expected before. But it is something you're in control of and you can do. So there are 4 core steps to managing and avoiding conflict in the workplace. The first one is to listen to understand. Really listen to your team, get to know them. Make it safe for them to speak so that they feel like they're going to be listened to. You can't suddenly walk into a conversation and say, right, today I'm going to listen to you. If you've not been listening all the way along, this is something that's built up. If somebody's come to you at a point in time, tried to raise something and not felt listened to or felt pushed away, they're unlikely to raise that again, and they're unlikely to raise the next thing as well. So listening has to be a core part of your culture. When we've got this, people feel understood, they feel heard. Even if they don't get things their way, they feel like they're understood, what their viewpoint is. And there's more of a chance they're going to listen to you and try to understand your viewpoint. It's so important, therefore, that we create an environment where people feel psychologically safe. They feel safe to come into work, to be themselves, to be able to open up, to talk. And that's going to help you manage everything from performance to absence to discipline situations to new ideas. That core bit of a culture is so vital to everything in terms of managing people in a way that really does get the best out of people and minimises conflict. When we've got this culture, we can also support and encourage others to listen as well. So it may well be that we've got people who find that really difficult and a real challenge, and we can coach them, we can support them because it's part of our culture, it's what's expected. And that way we get everybody listening to each other in a way that they want to understand each other. When people feel heard and feel like they can be themselves, they are much more likely to not get into these conflict situations. Things will get aired as they go along so they don't build up and they don't fester. Forgive the quick interruption to this video, and I will keep it really quick. If you've liked this video, found it useful, you can of course hit the subscribe button, but I also want to tell you about our digital courses. In our digital courses, I go into much more detail. The videos are very similar to these. It's me, it's on camera, but there's also downloads, there's sample forms, there's a few sample policies in there as well. All the things that you need to know. We've even got some coming where we've got live classes as well. So check out our digital courses. Details are on screen now and in the description below. Look forward to seeing you on one of our courses in the future, and in the meantime, I'll let you get back to the video. The second point is understanding what the solution is in terms of both parties having a view to trying to reach a solution. So this is when we've actually got into conflict. So if we've got a culture where we listen to understand, we're less likely to get into a conflict in the first place. But when we do get into conflict, then we can start to have a conversation which is focused on reaching a solution. We're not focusing on slinging mud. We're not focused on pulling up every past accusation. Well, you didn't do that 6 months ago. That's not helpful to the situation. This conversation needs to be focused on reaching a solution. find the things that you do agree on. Find the points where there is a connection and look for a win-win. Now, win-win isn't necessarily going to be everybody getting what they want. That's not always possible. And a compromise is also not always useful. Sometimes it is. Sometimes there's somewhere you can meet in the middle and it actually works. But let's think about it like this. If I was going to the cinema with my partner, I like sitting at the back of the cinema and he wanted to sit in the front row. We might compromise and say, well, let's sit in the middle. But actually, then neither of us are happy. Neither of us are getting what we want. So a win-win would be more about, well, let's sit at the back this time and at the front next time. We've really got to think about whether a compromise really is a compromise, whether it actually works for anybody, or whether we do lean towards one or the other solution at this point. But it's about trying to work out how we kind of get that win-win. So in the cinema experience, it may well be that the win-win is, okay, yeah, this time we'll sit at the back so that next time we can sit at the front. And that is the win-win. We've both got that opportunity to have a win situation, even though today, here, right now, we're not both in a win situation. So try and think widely around that kind of win-win. How can we get to a point where each individual feels like they've gained something from this, where each individual feels heard, and everybody's been focused on a discussion that is about finding a solution. How do we get through this? How do we get to a point where we are looking at a solution? When somebody's slinging mud, deflecting, they're pulling out, well, actually, this over here means that you didn't listen to me over here, so why should I listen to you there? All of these things are really unhealthy and really toxic, and we need to close those down. That's where we might start to see a toxic behaviour or somebody who is breaking down that conversation. And we may really need to look at, is that both parties doing that? Is it one party? Is one party constantly having to defend themselves rather than trying to focus on reaching a solution? At the end of that conversation, it's really important that we agree on what the solution is and what the action points will be coming out of it, and record them. Keep that recorded so everybody knows what's coming out of this. It would be really unhealthy if we had that agreement and then somebody went off and did something else. Or the agreement came about because somebody said, no, you're doing this and I'm not listening to any other solution. These are unhealthy. What we really want is the two people to reach an agreement and to have that recorded, to say, this is what we're going to do and these are the action points and this is what each of us are going to do next, or who's going to do next, and by which date. So we've got really specific things that we can come back to and that we can measure progress, and that's really important for performance in the workplace anyway. And then the fourth point is making sure that we evaluate and that we review any decisions that we've come to. Just because we came to a decision then doesn't necessarily mean that 6 months, a year later, it's still the right decision. So it may well be worth going back and looking at, is that the right decision? Sometimes we have to just make a decision, move on, and if it's not the right one, oh well, we've learnt from it. In other situations where it's something more ongoing, it may be right to reflect and change that decision later on down the line if we realise it wasn't the right one. So always be prepared to change your mind, to evaluate, to review the decisions that you've made. So that's it, my 4 steps to managing conflict. Firstly, make sure you've got a culture where you listen to understand. Secondly, making sure that in your discussions, the focus is on finding a solution and both working together on that solution. Once you've reached a solution, make an agreement, make an action plan and keep it recorded and then evaluate it. Please do have a look at videos on discipline and toxic superstars. I've got a video on toxic superstars. It's worth having a look at that because those toxic behaviours are really damaging, and the reason I call them toxic superstars is because so often they are great performers. They're often your top salesperson, but they can be really damaging to a culture, and particularly a culture where you don't want conflict.